Do you remember something about your contact with the floor at the beginning of the day? This morning? Can you recall or recall an impression from at the end of the ATM? What do you notice now? Do you still feel, sense what you noticed at the end of the lesson? Or do you feel like you're more where you were at the beginning of the lesson, before we did the lesson? So please roll to lie on your left side. Notice how it is for you to lie on your left side. How does your left side relate to the floor? Your left foot, lower leg, knee, your thigh, the left side of your pelvis. It's so easy for us to skip our attention. Or to, oh, it's familiar, doesn't stand out, so we can skip over it or dismiss it. But most of us don't move similarly with our two sides, because we habituate to a dominant hand, a dominant leg, sometimes to a work environment. And our structure is not symmetrical, but we can function more or less symmetrically. Notice how the left side of you, your ribs, your waist, meet the ground. How it is to lie on your left shoulder. The contact of the floor with your left elbow, your left hand. Where do you breathe? Lying on your left side. Are you rolled a little forwards or a little backwards? Or more in the middle? So sometimes one side, our organization allows us to lie more directly on the side, and on the other side it could be that our shoulder isn't quite as free or differentiated, and we roll a little more forwards or a little more backwards. And how you place your left arm can influence whether you roll forwards or backwards. So stand your right hand on the floor in front of you and begin to imagine doing the movement on this side. Just imagine. You can have your head on your arm or your left arm out in front of you, or your arm bent and supporting your head, whatever's comfortable for you. So when you think of imagining the movement, what do you do? How do you do that? Can you imagine moving your elbow and knee closer toward one another and then a little apart? Don't actually do it. Just imagine it. And in your imagination, what would you feel through the length of your torso, the back of you, the front of you, a contact with the floor. What would need to happen in your chest, your ribs, along your left side, along your right side? How would your shape change? In your imagination, how clear are the relationships in this movement? Imagining yourself moving, of your elbow and your knee, your hand and your foot, your shoulder and your hip on your right side. There are places that are less clear, places that are clearer. And in your imagination of the movement, are you attending to a detail, parts of yourself, or can you attend to the whole? Have a bigger picture, more global attention. Now gradually make the movement so tiny that I can't see you moving, but begin to mobilize your imagination into action with the smallest movement possible. Tiny. And then notice how you're breathing and what sensations you feel as you begin to mobilize yourself that perhaps weren't present when you imagined yourself doing the movement. Does more or less of you participate on this side? And then very gradually, I'm very impressed. Not that my being impressed is important, but to have a group that when you say small and when you say tiny can actually do small and tiny is not all that common. So gradually make the movement a little bigger, thinking of bringing your right elbow and your right knee closer together and apart. Can you make it incrementally larger? Feel what happens through the length of your back, the length of your front, and how the distance between your right hand and your right foot changes. Can you still think of your chest moving away from your hand? That initial action, that initiation that can come from the center of you. So we can move our limbs distally on our torso, or we can have our torso, central parts of ourselves, move in a way that organizes our limbs. Can you feel the weight of your right leg on your left? Do you have any sense that as your right side is coming together and moving apart, that the left side of you changes its contact with the floor? And as you allow your movement to grow a little bit more, Think about your right shoulder and your right hip joint, your head and your knee. Keeping everything, letting everything be on the floor as much as possible. So you're not doing extra work to lift your leg or lift your arm. And as your movement expands, your right arm, your right leg begin to reach the floor and move in an arc. Your hand upward and to the right, your leg downward and to the right. Just notice how quickly do you straighten your leg. Are your leg and arm moving at the same rate? Unfolding and lengthening at the same rate? Coming back together at the same rate? Elbow and knee, shoulder and hip, hand and foot. Try shifting your attention to take in different relationships. Is it smoother on this side? Or less smooth? When do you feel? So let's try something. Pause on your side for a moment. And now think of taking your sternum backwards. So to do that, you'll probably feel your belly will come in, be drawn in a little bit. Your back will round backwards. Does the whole of your spine participate in that? And let it go. Now I'm going to try out this image that Julie suggested of a nose. Can you imagine that you're wearing a belt and the nose is on your belt, attached to your belt, in the middle of your back, and your nose wants to sniff something on the floor, so that you begin to roll backwards, folding. Your legs might slide a little differently, so you're not pulling your knees up to yourself now. You're still going to have the same idea of lengthening your legs, lengthening your right leg, lengthening your right arm, but you're thinking of rounding your lower back. Now, the next time you do it, can you try arching your lower back? So you're taking your elbow and knee away from one another, but arch your lower back as you roll backwards. And feel the difference. Which way's right? In a way, neither and both. It depends what you want to do, depends on your organization, but maybe there's somewhere in the middle, because what can happen is that people change from one to the other and we don't know it. So we start by lengthening, but actually if we do a little bit more lengthening than's needed, we can go into extending. And if you really try it out, arching your back, you may notice that that changes the way you relate to the floor, changes your contact with the floor. So how much arching, how much folding, how much length do we need to do in order to roll? So now try it however you'd like to do it. And notice, how does the movement move through you? Everything, optimally, everything is moving. Is it together? There's a certain moment of rolling over your left side where you're no longer balanced on your left side, and you don't need to work so much if you allow gravity, the weight of your limbs and gravity, to do the work. So you might find there's a sort of cascade or a waterfall effect where you're pouring your weight to the ground. Now, some of these words may make sense to you, some may not, but you can try them on. Sometimes images can really help us get a sense of ourselves, relate to ourselves differently in a way that changes our movement. And sometimes it can be an improvement and help us find some different organization in a way that we couldn't before. And sometimes the image doesn't work for us. So where do you roll back onto your left side, pause a moment. And then think of taking your elbow, knee, hand, foot away from one another, and notice, where do you begin? How do you begin? What moves first? And then expand it a little bit and then come back. If you find a difficult moment, can you stop and come back? Or if you notice, if you become aware that your arm is moving faster than your leg, can you come back and see if you can monitor them so they travel at the same speed? If you think of your hand and your foot drawing a line through space and shape through space or on the floor, what shape would it be? Could you experiment with beginning this opening, unfolding, and folding movement from different places? So could you initiate it from your right shoulder and your right hip? Does that make it harder or easier? And when you do that, does your torso change its shape? You feel it, does it lengthen more easily? Maybe it moves folds more easily when you think of your shoulder and your hip coming together. Or maybe it opens more easily. So if you're initiating with your shoulder and your hip, your right shoulder and hip, your arms and legs are passengers. They're following along, being moved as a consequence of the mobilization of the center of your cells, the corners of your cells. How is your head participating? Could your head initiate the movement? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Next time you come towards your back, can you come all the way onto your back? And rest a moment. Begin to roll to return to your left side. But see, can you begin with your left elbow and your left knee coming towards one another? Just begin. Tiniest movement. So your leg would roll outwards, your knee would bend a little bit, and you'd be sliding your elbow, moving your arm so your elbow slides towards your left knee, and then letting them come apart again. Can you feel how that folds you? And then bring your right arm on the floor above your head. Begin the movement with drawing your left elbow and left knee towards one another, and feel when would it be helpful to sweep your right hand and your right foot in a big arc to the left so your right knee and right elbow come towards one another. So in true rolling, there is no increase in pressure on the floor. Just the place that is in contact with the floor is continually changing. Which means that if you notice there's a place where a foot presses, or a hand presses, or a part of you presses, that's a moment to notice, what are you doing with yourself that you need to do that? Is there something you could be doing differently, or some part of yourself that's outside of your awareness that you could bring in to make your rolling more rolly? So the next time you roll back onto your back, your legs are long and sliding on the floor. They're not bent unless you need them to be bent. Your feet would be apart a little bit. Can you roll to your right? And then you closed on your right. Can you unfold so that you arms and leg lengthen, then you end on your back. Both arms and legs are lengthened above your head, and spread, so you're lying like a X. And then continue rolling to the other side, onto your left side. Then roll back onto your back and onto the right side. So begin rolling from side to side and see if you can find any difference in how you involve yourself, what you move and when. Rolling in one direction, rolling in the other. So slowly make the movement a little faster, but become aware of your neighbors. And find out if it's possible to make this a more social movement. So you're aware of yourself and you're aware of other. And you begin to adjust yourself a little so that you roll in the same direction. At least each line is rolling. Your legs are on the ground. You're still opening and closing, unfolding and folding. And it's not about having stiff arms, because then you're working your arms. You're doing unnecessary work. So your arms can be soft. They can be softly bent. Everything stays close to the ground as much as possible, as much as you're able. And then the next time you're on your back, stay there. Notice your contact with the floor now. So this may have balanced your sense of self between your two sides. May have not. May have and made a difference. But more commonly, when you've learnt on one side, you've felt the asymmetry, you've explored it on the other side, and you've explored alternating one side to the other, then our nervous system usually finds more of a balanced sense of self. Notice where you feel the movement of your breathing now. The length of your front, along your sides, your back. Your sense of self. Your experience of yourself. And then when you're ready, slowly roll yourself to one side. See if you have more choice about which side you want to roll to now or feel like rolling to now. Bring yourself up to sitting and up into standing. And now notice how you sense you're standing now. Turn a little, shift right and left. And walk around. And while you're walking around, notice what you're attending to. Maybe you want to direct your attention, or maybe you want to let your attention be soft and meandering. And then walk yourself to get together with 2 other people. And you're going to take just 5 or 10 minutes to talk about your experience from this lesson. It could be 4 if so. Make yourselves comfortable. Pardon? Rolling with the whole self.